Why knowledge began changing outcomes. At first, knowledge felt harmless, a record of what already existed, a reflection, not a force. For most of human history, knowing something and changing something were treated as separate acts, comfortably divided by intention, time, and responsibility, allowing societies to believe that understanding the world carried no obligation beyond accuracy. To understand why that belief no longer holds, we need to return to the moment knowledge stopped staying still. Advances in science, data collection, and modeling did not merely increase understanding. They accelerated it, automated it, and embedded it directly into the systems they described. Knowledge began moving faster than human reflection. At first, the shift felt empowering. Better information led to better decisions. Data revealed patterns invisible to intuition. Outcomes improved. Efficiency increased. The world seemed more legible, more manageable, more predictable. But something subtle was happening underneath. Knowledge was no longer arriving after events. It was arriving before them. Predictions began shaping preparation. Measurements influenced behavior in advance. Models adjusted environments preemptively, altering conditions so that expected outcomes became more likely simply because they were expected. This was the first reveal. Knowledge had crossed from explanation into anticipation. When systems were informed in advance, they adapted in advance. Decisions were not just informed by knowledge, they were constrained by it. What was known became what was possible. What was unknown quietly disappeared from consideration. This transformation was not driven by malice or intent. It was driven by speed. Knowledge flowed directly into action, bypassing deliberation. There was no pause where consequences could be weighed. Insight became infrastructure. As this pattern repeated, outcomes began aligning with knowledge itself, not because the knowledge was wrong, but because it was powerful. The world started reorganizing around what was measured, predicted, and understood. Knowledge stopped waiting to be applied. It applied itself. And once that happened, the relationship between understanding and consequence changed forever. Because in a world where knowledge moves faster than choice, knowing something no longer describes what will happen. It helps decide it. As this shift deepened, researchers began noticing that knowledge was no longer neutral information moving through the world, but a structural force that quietly reorganized behavior, incentives, and expectations long before any explicit decision was made. What had once been descriptive slowly became prescriptive. When systems knew what was likely to happen, they adjusted in advance, reshaping conditions so that alternative outcomes struggled to survive. Preparation replaced reaction. Anticipation replaced choice. This revealed a deeper truth. Knowledge does not simply inform systems. It conditions them. Once information is embedded into automated processes, institutions, and infrastructures, it stops being optional. It becomes part of the environment itself. People do not choose whether to respond to it. They move within the pathways it creates. This effect appeared everywhere at once. Economic forecasts influenced markets before policies were written. Risk models reshaped behavior before dangers appeared. Performance metrics altered work before results were measured. In each case, knowledge acted first and reality followed. The feedback loop was subtle but powerful. Knowledge shaped behavior. Behavior validated knowledge. Validation strengthened trust. Trust accelerated adoption. And with each cycle, outcomes aligned more tightly with what was already known. This alignment created the illusion of inevitability. It felt as though the world was simply behaving as expected, when in fact expectations had been engineered into the system itself. Possibility narrowed quietly, not through force, but through alignment. What could not be predicted was slowly excluded from what could occur. The conflict sharpened when anomalies appeared. Unexpected outcomes were treated as errors instead of signals. Rare events were filtered out instead of explored. Knowledge systems optimized for consistency began rejecting surprise. This marked a dangerous turning point. When knowledge begins filtering reality instead of revealing it, understanding becomes constraint. The world stops teaching us new things, not because novelty has vanished, but because our systems are no longer designed to notice it. Knowledge had not just changed outcomes. It had begun choosing which outcomes were allowed to exist. And that realization set the stage for a much deeper reckoning. The conflict reached its breaking point when scientists, policymakers, and designers began to recognize that knowledge-driven systems were no longer merely influencing outcomes at the surface level, but were actively reshaping the deeper structure of how futures could form in the first place. When knowledge anticipates reality, it compresses uncertainty. And when uncertainty is compressed too aggressively, systems lose their ability to adapt. What appears stable becomes fragile. What appears efficient becomes brittle. The future narrows not because options disappear, but because they are never allowed to emerge. This became painfully clear in moments of failure. Crises that models had confidently ruled out arrived suddenly and with disproportionate force. Systems optimized around known risks collapse when confronted with unknown ones. The very knowledge designed to protect stability had filtered out the signals that warned of change. The emotional tension intensified as a pattern became undeniable. The more knowledge guided action in advance, the less space remained for learning through experience. Systems stopped discovering reality through interaction and began enforcing expectations through anticipation. Feedback arrived too late to matter because the structure had already hardened. This revealed a paradox at the heart of modern knowledge. Understanding too early can be as dangerous as understanding too late. By acting on predictions before reality unfolds, systems lock themselves into trajectories that resist correction. Errors no longer remain local. They propagate across networks, amplified by trust in the knowledge that produced them. At this stage, control becomes illusion. Decision-makers believe they are choosing freely, but the range of choices has already been curated by what the system knows. The future feels smooth, managed, and rational, until it subtly breaks in ways no one prepared for. This is where the deepest conflict lies. Knowledge was meant to reduce uncertainty, not eliminate it. Yet in removing uncertainty too aggressively, systems lose resilience, curiosity, and the capacity to respond to surprise. The world becomes predictable right up until it isn't. Knowledge had not simply changed outcomes. It had begun reshaping the conditions under which outcomes could still surprise us. And once surprise disappears, adaptation soon follows. The climax arrived with a realization that reframed the role of knowledge itself. Knowledge did not begin changing outcomes because it was wrong, biased, or misused. It began changing outcomes because it became fast, embedded, and inseparable from action. Once understanding moved at the speed of systems, it stopped waiting for judgment. What emerged was not a failure of intelligence, but a transformation of causality. Knowledge no longer followed events. It preceded them. It shaped environments in advance, altered incentives before decisions were made, and quietly redirected behavior toward what was already expected. In doing so, it replaced open futures with managed ones. This exposed a core insight. Knowledge is not neutral when it arrives early enough to reorganize reality. When predictions, measurements, and models become infrastructure, they stop being reflections and start becoming constraints. They do not merely describe what is likely. They make certain paths easier to walk and others nearly impossible to find. The future becomes efficient but narrow, stable but fragile. The resolution was not rejection of knowledge, but recalibration. Systems that remain resilient do not eliminate uncertainty. They preserve it deliberately. They treat surprise as information, not error. They allow room for deviation, exploration, and correction after reality is spoken, not before it has been allowed to speak at all. This matters now because modern life is saturated with anticipatory knowledge. Scores, forecasts, rankings, and models guide decisions at every scale. When left unchecked, they quietly replace experience with expectation. Learning slows. Adaptation weakens. Reality becomes less instructive, not because it has nothing new to teach, but because we stop listening. Knowledge began changing outcomes the moment we forgot that uncertainty is not a flaw in understanding. It is the source of it. And protecting that uncertainty may be the most important responsibility that comes with knowing too much, too quickly, too well. Why